Good morning, everybody, and thank you for waking up with us this week with our weekly Wake Up. Our goal, as always, during the show is to provide all of our employees with updated and relevant information in regards to the reintroduction and pandemic, and to let everyone hear and ask questions of our plans and practices. This morning, I am very excited to have a great group of panelists. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but as always, if you have questions that you'd like to submit, you can do that through bit.ly/BVSD Wake Up, and our team will be looking at those and pulling them up throughout the course of the session here today. Before I turn off this screen, I do want to mention that we've got a number of great folks joining us this morning. Margaret Crespo, our Area Superintendent of the Southwest Network, Robin Fernandez, Area Superintendent East Network, Sam Messier, Area Superintendent Northwest Network, Mike Rados, the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Rob Price, our Assistant Superintendent of Operational Services, Stephanie Farron, the Director of Health Services. And then before we get started, and I'm going to stop sharing this real quick here so that we can bring in Superintendent Rob Anderson for a quick chance to hear his thoughts this morning. Good morning, Rob.
Good morning, Randy, and thank you, everybody. Thanks for having us. And again, and Randy, thank you so much for setting this up, the weekly Wake Up. I think this has been a great way for us to continue to communicate to our employees. I believe this idea actually came from our employees as one of their suggestions. And so we're continuing to try to listen, try to do everything we can to communicate. Obviously, last week was a big week for everybody. We were able to complete our feasibility study. Our timeline kept the spirit of the working advisory group in regards to the spirit of their recommendations, but because of feasibility, we moved up elementary school, and we were able to move up middle and high school a little bit, and also bring middle school back 2 days a week as opposed to 1 day a week. And I think that a lot of people are excited and a lot of people are afraid. I think there's a lot of emotions anytime that you make these decisions, especially during a pandemic. My hope is that through avenues like the weekly Wake Up and other ways of communicating, we can help alleviate fears. For those of you that tuned in to our board meeting last night, that our plan was heralded by both Broomfield Public Health, Boulder County Public Health. They feel really comfortable. We've also had a couple of air quality experts support our plan. And so, we've really tried to check all the boxes and making sure that what we're doing is safe and feasible, and we feel like we're there. So I'm really, really excited. I just want to end, Randy, by just saying thank you to everybody. I know how hard everyone is working. No one has ever worked this hard in public education. I've spent a lot of time in schools over the past few weeks. I've been to 25 schools in the past couple of weeks, checking in on teachers, thanking them, welcoming back students, checking in with leaders to see what everybody needs. And I'll continue to do that. And I think we'll all continue to do that to make sure folks feel safe, folks feel like they have exactly what they need to make this happen and work. But again, I understand that there's fears that are out there, and I think those are legitimate. Again, we're going to just try to work closely with our employees, principals, teachers to help answer questions. I know lots of people have really specific questions, and we have answers, and we've been working really hard to make sure that we can answer those. Again, avenues like this morning give us an opportunity to do that. So thank you, everybody, for all that you're doing. I know that we've got a lot of work ahead of us before the 20th and the 27th for those of you that are coming back that have been either teaching remotely from home or remotely from your homes. But I will tell you, there is the excitement that's in our schools between our kids, our teachers, once we get the kids back in person, has been really just an incredible thing to watch and witness. And so I'm looking forward to all of you to be able to experience that as well. So that's all I have, Randy, unless you have any questions or.
I guess the only question that I'd ask you, if you're open to it, is the idea that I know that a lot of the conversations that you and I and the cabinet have had, have to do with, the reason that we are, really dedicated to bringing students back is because we know, a good number of our kids really need that in-person support and instruction.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Randy. I think that while some kids are doing really, really well in this environment, others aren't. And I think that we have a whole new group of vulnerable students that are vulnerable for different reasons because of the isolation, because what this pandemic has done to them and their families. And it's important for them to get back to school. And I think that we all recognize that and understand that. They need us. And a lot of our parents need us. I can tell you that I probably get the most communication from desperate families, desperate kids, asking us, when can we go back, please? The parents asking me to help save their kids. because this isolation and this pandemic has just put them in a bad place. And we look forward to being there for those kids, for those families, and for all of our families when they come back to school. But there is certainly a sense of urgency to get our kids back. That we have a lot of families that are struggling, a lot of kids that are struggling more than I think anybody realizes, and we need to be there for them. And so again, we are proud of the plan we have in place, and are moving forward confidently, and looking forward to having all those kids back. So thanks, Randy. That was a great question.
Thank you, Rob. And thank you, Superintendent Anderson, for joining us today. So we are going to move on to our panel at this point. And I do want to remind everybody once more that we do have a way for everyone to submit their questions. I'm going to just share my screen once more as we get everything set up here. If you have questions today, you want to just make sure that you send them to bit.ly. That's bit.ly/BVSD Wake Up. It's that simple. And we've got a form there that you can send in, and then we'll be taking a look at that. Again, I'm so excited to have such a great group of folks here on the line with us. And to do the honors of the Q&A this morning, I'm going to introduce Carolyn Noe from my department, who will be handling the panel. Do you want to go and take it away, Carolyn?
Sure. Thanks, Randy. Thanks to everyone for their questions, and to our panelists for answering and joining us early this morning. Let's begin with Sam. Can you give us a brief update on what was discussed at the board meeting on Thursday?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Carolyn. So, as Dr. Anderson stated, when we have been engaging in a feasibility study of the Phase 2+ recommendations for the last couple of weeks, and looking at whether or not it would be possible, given the health data and given our organizational capacity, to accelerate the timeline on some of those things. So just as Dr. Anderson said, keeping within the spirit of those recommendations, but trying to honor what's happening with our health data, which is improving in Boulder County, I think, to everyone's relief, which means that we'll be able to get our kids back a little bit sooner. So at elementary, of course, we already have our PK students already coming 2 days a week in a hybrid model. We've got our K-2 students coming 4 days a week. We're really excited that we'll be welcoming back our 3rd through 5th grade students in addition to that on October 20th for 4 days a week. Also that week at secondary, we'll be starting 6th graders in a 2 day per week hybrid model, and our 9th graders attending 1 day per week, with the other 3 days of the instructional week being in home learning. And then on October 27th, reintroducing 7th and 8th grades, again in a 2 day per week hybrid model, and 9th through 12th grades in a 1 day per week model. So we're really excited about that. We are asking parents to, by the end of the day tomorrow, to please update their information in Infinite Campus about whether they would like to move from in-person to home learning at this time. If for whatever reason they feel like they'd like to keep their child home, that's totally okay. So that's the really short version, but excited to hear what questions we have from the audience.
Great, thanks, Sam. Let's start with the topic that's gotten the most questions: plans to have our educators teach both in person and students online. For example, Jenny McGee from University Hill asks, is it possible to have dedicated teachers for remote learners? It is impossible to teach in-person kindergarteners and virtually at the same time. Likewise, Mary Butler, a Boulder High language arts teacher, asked, I've heard from my friends in other districts that it's completely unsustainable to keep teaching to both in-person and those at home at the same time. Since we have this information, how are we working to make this hybrid situation better than what's currently happening in other districts? Margaret, this is something that some of our schools are doing. How are we supporting teachers in making this transition?
Thanks, Carolyn, for the question. I would definitely say that in some of our buildings, we have been able to, with the work of the principal and the amazing staff, figure out ways to do both remote and in person. And I would also say that part of it is, in as much as possible, moving to the synchronous opportunities online together, let's say at the beginning of the course, knowing that you would still have students online doing some of that level of independent work. I don't think that there's an expectation that students would be connected the entire time that the class is going on. Our goal would be that they are connecting with their classmates and their teacher and finding ways to do group work. And one of the things when we talk to our partners that we have found to be really, really important is to try to find ways for staff to do as much of the lesson planning and unit development and lesson acquisition on the online system, so that they're putting everything into Schoology and making sure, and Seesaw, and making sure that the opportunities are there, versus trying to build 2 lessons, 2 systems, and 2 approaches, and using home learning as one of the groups within the classroom.
Great, thanks, Margaret.
If I could also jump in, Carolyn, I
Sure.
would also add that many people have probably heard to date about Teachology, which is the program that we've developed to support teachers through our professional learning department. And the current focus of that program is not only on answering just, one-off urgent questions, also providing very deep support for teachers who are wanting it at this point to develop proficiency and mastery in either remote learning or in hybrid learning. But their focus right now also is on working with our teachers, K2, who have been back several days now in a hybrid environment, and on collecting the practices that they've been engaging in. We have a lot of teachers who are doing an exemplary job of that. And interestingly enough, there is no set of best practices in existence yet for how do you teach in a hybrid environment. And so in true BBSD fashion, we are collecting our own. And so under the leadership of Katie Mills and her team, they are doing exactly that. And so with that information, they will be pushing out information to our teachers on what are the tips, what are the watch outs, what are the things to know, and then how is it that we can help you. So the Teachology program is working fast and furiously in that arena.
Great, thanks for Evan for adding that. Maybe that would be a great future episode too. Let's move on to some health-related questions that we've been getting as well from our staff. Jolie Evans from Heatherwood wrote, please address the recent cases at Whittier and in Boulder. Stephanie, do you want to talk about the recent cases your team has handled and the quarantine process that we've gone through?
Sure, thanks, Carolyn. I know that these quarantine cases can be really scary to everyone. It feels like there's a lot of people that are affected, and there's a reason for that. It's really the most precautions that we can put in place to make sure that if there is somebody that's positive in school, that we're keeping those people at home and letting them go through the quarantine process to reduce any transmission. In some cases, we're going to have to quarantine classes even when we don't have a positive case, because the way the guidance is set up through our state health department for the level that we're in right now. There are times when we even take that precaution of somebody being sick and we're not sure if they're positive yet or not, and we will ask students to stay home until we're sure. Again, it's all really to make sure that if there is any cases in schools, that we close, that we stop that transmission. And there have been, a lot of other school districts that have gone back across the metro area, and a lot with a lot more students in classes right now. And you might see that there are a lot of students who are being quarantined. The one thing that is really kind of great for us to see is that we don't have a lot of transmission, almost no transmission within classrooms. So even though somebody might be positive in the classroom, when that classroom goes home and quarantines, we're not seeing other people in those classes that are becoming positive. And so we don't know also where kiddos are during the day and sometimes in the evenings and with sports and friends and other things. So even when there is other cases within the school, it might not necessarily be from that classroom. So that's kind of how we're handling it right now.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Mary Beth Lee, a teacher at Eisenhower Elementary, noted the recent information about COVID-19 in Boulder and asked, why is this not concerning? Why is the horrible air quality that we are forced to have kids play in not concerning? Why are we taking a Pollyanna approach to our children's health and safety? Stephanie, our approach has not been far from Pollyanna. Can you talk about what has gone into our planning and what our partners in public health have had to say recently?
Sure. So yeah, it's definitely not a Pollyanna approach that we're taking here. We work every day with public health. Usually many times during the day, we're on the phone with them talking about what's happening in the community. That, big spike that we had from CU, Boulder County Public Health and CU put some really good processes in place to stop that. And we've seen those numbers decrease, steadily since those orders were put in place. And right now, our numbers are pretty steady. We're not seeing huge increases in our school-age children. Those are being, held pretty steady. Our hospitalizations are holding pretty steady. Our positivity rate is holding nice and steady and is in the green zone. So we look at all of those things and really have to think about how things are moving over time and what are the corrections that we are making and how will those play out down the road. So right now, even though it seems really scary, when we look at the trends that are happening now, we see everything kind of coming back into line a little bit the way it was before CU was there. And that gives us some pretty good opportunities to make sure that we're moving forward. And like Dr. Anderson mentioned, our public health departments are very supportive of that. Being outside is a great thing because we know that transmission is, virtually non-existent when people are spaced apart and they're outside. And of course, the wildfire smoke has really hindered that to some extent. It's a balance between, whether we can be outside and if that's okay for our students, which one, everybody needs a little mask break. Everybody needs to get outside and get some movement and air. We do have outdoor air quality standards that are on our website that really help outline what to do at different levels of what the air quality is. And even though it's smelled terrible and it's been pretty hazy, usually in the mornings we're okay and we can have students outside. Our nurses and health room staff are also really watching students who have identified respiratory conditions to make sure that either they stay inside or somebody is aware of what's going on for them. So there's a lot of pieces that go into it. And I think that our staff are doing a pretty good job of making sure that they're looking over all of those and, pulling out the best practices for kids.
Thanks, Stephanie. Let's address another part of that question too, and what you mentioned about air quality. Rob Price, do you want to speak a little bit about how your team has been managing air qualities in our buildings?
Yeah, good question, Carolyn. Can you pull up the presentation
Sure.
from the board meeting, Carolyn?
Yes.
That might help. I'll talk through a little bit of it, but team is working extremely hard over the last 4 or 5 months putting together our plan. We have reached out to some consultants, McKinstry being one, the University of Colorado and the University of Tulsa, who have all supported our plan. Thank you, Carolyn.
Yeah.
But the way we start our day is flushing our buildings 2 hours prior to occupancy. And then we end our day by flushing the building 1 hour after occupancy. And what we're doing there again is forcing air into our buildings. So we're not recirculating the air. And all you're doing is diluting that air. So then during the day, as this states, the volume in the air is we're bringing in 100% outside air. And we're doing that again to dilute that air. And it's at 100% when temperatures allow, or let's say smoke conditions allow. So at minimum, we have 4 air exchanges per hour. At maximum, we have 12. So even at that minimum of 4 air exchanges an hour, we still exceed ASHRAE's recommendation. We have put portable HEPA air filtration units in the isolation rooms and the health rooms. And then we've upgraded our filters from a MERV 8 filter to a MERV 11. And we understand that the recommendation is a MERV 13 filter. However, our systems won't support a MERV 13 filter. We have too much backup on the system. Therefore, we can't get the air exchanges that we're looking for. I think what's important here is we're talking about a ventilation. It's one layer, right, to a multi-layered approach as we're thinking about this. And you can take the presentation off now, Carolyn. Okay. But when we think about this, ventilation is one piece, masking is another piece, distancing is another, making sure you don't come to our building sick is an extremely important piece to this. So the passive screening process that we have in place, cleaning high-touch surfaces, et cetera. We talked at length about that at the board meeting the other night. You know, it's an all-in approach as we're thinking about cleaning, right? Our custodians are doing a lot of that. We're going to be asking all of our instructional staff to help out in their classrooms, and then we'll bring in contractors as needed. We also have some transportation employees that have stepped up and volunteered to help us out, primarily between that 9 and 2 window to get in and clean those spaces. So I just want everybody to remember it is a multi-layered approach. And you know, if one thing fails, we've got those other ones in. So, you know, if you're in a classroom and there is no ventilation, we should be moving you out of that classroom until we can get that system up and running. So good question, but thank you, Carolyn.
Great, thanks, Rob. Back to you, Stephanie. We have a question from Teresa from Community Montessori. What is the plan for social distancing the children K-5 when there are not enough classrooms in the school?
So the social distancing regulations for or recommendations for schools really vary a little bit from what we think about in our personal lives and in our social environments. And one reason for that is because they recognize, they being CDPHE and even CDC and our local public health partners, that bringing students back to school is an essential activity. And so we really need to get kids back. They need to be in person. We need to be able to provide supports and services to them, as well as in-person education. And based on the science that they've seen over the past, 8 or 9 months now with this virus, having those multi-layered approaches, like Rob mentioned, having pre-screening, having students wearing masks, having the air filtration in classes, all of those things together really work to provide a layer of protection that precludes us needing to keep everybody, especially at the younger grades, apart 6 feet while they're in school. We have cohorts of classes, as everyone's familiar with, so that those kiddos stay together. If we have a case in a classroom, then that whole group that's been together goes home and works from home. But like we've mentioned, we're not seeing transmission in class. So although it can feel a little bit odd that you hear stay 6 feet from everyone everywhere else, in schools, those recommendations really have been relaxed, in partly because of the need to bring students back. And we know that we don't have enough room in our buildings to have everybody spaced 6 feet apart. And it's not really necessary in that environment.
Thanks, Stephanie. We've also gotten a few questions about contacts and what's considered a contact. And maybe, Margaret, you can address this as well. Are specialists considered adult contacts? Occupational therapists, physical therapists, SLPs, counselors, psych?
So what we've realized and through the help of the health departments, those contacts are not counted. So what we want to make sure is that adults understand that they're tracking where they are, and that students that adults are able to tell where they've been with students. But as Stephanie mentioned, a lot of that focus around getting kids back in school has become so essential that we want to make sure that people are keeping track so that they're able to trace, and certainly using all the components of health support that we've provided. But we want to keep them at a minimum, but those specialists are not considered part of the cohort contact.
Great, thanks, Margaret. Let's pivot over to some HR questions that have been coming in. Mike, as we've talked about previously, the district's providing tests to our employees free of charge through COVID Check Colorado. Why don't you remind us of how that works?
Sure. So COVID Check Colorado is actually working in other districts as well, contracting with other districts, and we've learned a lot from them. But if you want to schedule a COVID-19 test, you can go online by going to www.primarybio.com/a/BVSD. You get tested at a designated site, and those sites are on our website. And all of this, what I'm saying, is on our website for you to go to. There are designated sites. The closest ones that we have to Boulder Valley is actually at in the St. Vrain Valley School District at the Innovation Center. You'll get a clear and accurate COVID-19 test results in 72 hours. Those who test negative, you'll receive an email. However, if you test positive, you'll receive a phone call from the healthcare provider, the telehealth provider, who will then explain the results and then what supports and guidance they need to do and what next steps there are. And all results are safely and securely shared with designated district staff. Only district staff, designated district staff would know that. And of course, as required by law, positive test results are also reported to the Colorado Department of Public Health. So it's right now we have about 86 and maybe a little more that have tested and uses the site, and none have come back positive at this point. But if you go get tested somewhere else outside of the network, what we're doing with COVID-19 testing, we'll get those results too, but they won't impact our test results. It's actually working, and I think more and more people finding out about it are actually taking advantage of that. So I'd encourage you all to do that.
Great, thanks, Mike. It's kind of a follow-up question to that, and it's not quite HR related. A question from Tracy Brennan at Fairview writes, whether a test might be expanded. She asks, when are we going to start pulling kids with inexpensive tests so they don't come to school with the virus when asymptomatic? Stephanie, do you know anything about Boulder County Public Health and addressing students and testing?
There are test sites throughout Boulder and Broomfield counties. Some are free. Boulder County Public Health has a free drive-up site at Stasio Field that they have expanded at least for another week or so. We do have lists of resources here within Boulder and Broomfield counties, even around the state. And there's a resource, I believe, also on our websites where you can look up testing sites across the state. There is not a recommendation right now from public health, either local or national public health, to actually test everyone. There are really good recommendations on testing if you're symptomatic or if you've been in contact with somebody, but just testing everybody all the time is not a recommendation right now.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Mike, here's another question from Jolie Evans at Heatherwood. Why did you ask medically exempt people to reconsider their exemptions on the same day that the Daily Camera and Longmont Times reported case numbers going up? Teachers are feeling expendable.
Didn't know we had done that, to be honest with you. That had no correlation in why we asked. The reason why we asked about the exemption is because we had received several phone calls from exempt teachers who were saying, hey, I have an exemption, but I know the semester will come up. Do I have to reapply, or can I come back? Is that possible? And of course, then we decided then to get a communication out to all of them just to see where they were and what they wanted to do. And ironically, about a dozen of them do want to come back. They really are excited about going in person with students. They miss their students and they want to come back. So we're constantly going to be monitoring that. We'll probably send out another message just to ask if they're still considering. And if before that time, if they want to get in touch with me or with human resources, they're definitely welcome to do that.
Great, thanks, Mike. Here's another question from Joe Mason, one of our bus drivers. Yes, as a bus driver who works custodial lunch monitor COVID response team, I'm in relatively close contact with at least 9 cohorts against 3 schools. Transportation already has staff COVID cases and quarantining. Once a staff member uses up their allotted 10 days and all their accrued leave time quarantining, is he or she expected to take unpaid leave on subsequent quarantines?
No. That is something we've worked out, where if of a person who's working within the school system and has been exposed and has to be quarantined, and let's say they've been quarantined a second time, the first time they would use COVID-19 leave, paid leave. The second time they would not. That would not come out of their sick leave or annual leave at all.
Great, thanks, Mike.
The only clarification is that if they're out in the community and get exposed and have a tracing through that source, then they would take up their own leave.
Got it. That makes sense. Here's a question that just came in. Some universities are planning to have a winter break from Thanksgiving through New Year's in order to allow kids to quarantine before going to visit their families out of state. Is BVSD considering ensuring all traveling will happen over the winter holidays and won't lead to outbreaks? Stephanie, has public health started thinking ahead to winter break and plans for kids traveling and how that might work with them coming right back to school?
I know that CU is planning to do a break like that. In all honesty, I'm not sure that we have talked about that with public health for us. And right now there are no travel restrictions. That's another question that I get a lot. Both internationally and domestically, Colorado does not have travel restrictions in place. That could change at any time, just like everything else. And so I would really encourage folks to keep track of that. Look at CDC's website and even CDPHE's website to see if any travel restrictions are put in place.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. And here's another question that just came in from a teacher. If I have to miss school because I'm going to get tested after exposure exhibiting symptoms that could be COVID-19, for you, Mike, do I use an annual day or do I code my sub-request under an additional budgeting mechanism provided due to the pandemic?
That would be a COVID-19 leave.
Okay.
They could use their COVID-19 emergency leave for that.
Great, thanks. For you, Stephanie, when a student stays home sick and the parent phones into the absent line, how can we make sure that they also are doing the COVID screener and get the contact tracing started?
So, Carolyn, I think we actually have a communication that's going to go out to families probably today or tomorrow, hopefully, reminding them that even when their child, if they have a child that's in person learning and they're out for any illness-related absence, that we still want them to complete that daily health check. Like you mentioned, it allows us to be able to see if the child is out due to major symptoms or minor symptoms, and which triggers our response in how to follow up with them. There's 24 hours, 48 hours that we need to follow up, and then they might need to go and get a test before they can return. So yes, we will be reminding folks to please complete those screeners.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Question for you, Robin, since you had brought up about Teachology before, a teacher's asking, can a Teachology expert come to our school and lead a few hybrid sessions to show us how it's done? They're having some trouble with audio and video and getting their system set up.
So what I take from that question is primarily tech.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, our Teachology network staff are willing to support with anything, but also the IT department has now added many extra resources in technology specifically. So if it's getting Rebus set up, if it's understanding how to use Rebus, if it's other questions, hardware, software, whatever. So you are always welcome to call the IT helpline, and that's the same number as always and the same email as always. And they are very able to answer any of those questions as well. But if you have questions for Teachology, please feel free to reach out to them as well. And they will make sure that the right person gets connected with that school, that teacher, that staff to answer those specific questions.
Great, thanks, Robin. I just missed where I was going to read from. Since school staff is being required to return to buildings, it's only fair that district level employees have to return to their building and work in close quarters for several hours a day. If you're requiring teachers and school staff to do the same, will district personnel and admin be required to return to the Ed Center? Rob Price, do you want to talk a little bit about the construction that was going on at the Ed Center and plans for having staff return?
Yeah, excited to. And actually, we are opening up the Ed Center today, to be honest with you. So construction on the new addition is wrapping up. If you drive by, it still looks like there's a lot of work going on, which is still doing a lot of landscaping. But overall, we opened the building up at 7:30 this morning, and employees are going to be reporting. And we will open it back up to the public on November 2nd.
Awesome, Rob. That's very exciting. We're all excited to go back as well. Let's see. There's a question from an elementary teacher. Hand hygiene, 6 feet of distance, gathering in groups, and proper mask usage are the normal measures to protect people from COVID. However, my students are not able to wear masks correctly all day. How should we address that in the classroom? Robin, I know you've been working a lot with Dennis in special ed, and Kathleen has been working with him on, for kids who are unable to wear masks. Do you want to address that just a little bit?
Sure, I'm happy to.
Mm-hmm.
So, different students have different needs, whether they are students with special needs and it is related to a medical condition or to a special need of some sort. Our special ed staff is working closely with special educators, buildings, principals, and individual students and staff on developing mask tolerance. However, not every student has developed that to date, or certain students with medical needs may not be able to. So if you need extra support with that, please reach out to your principal and they will connect you with the district team or the special education provider that can provide additional guidance, because every student is different, and the reason that he or she may not be able to wear a mask is individualized in that sense as well. So we have a lot of guidance, but also a lot of support and work that we can do with students and families to help with that.
Thanks, Robin. Rob Price, we have a follow-up question about air quality. Have you measured the air in each of the rooms where children will be learning in person to be sure that it's replaced at a rate of 100%? And if so, how often is it being replaced at 100%?
Yes, the mechanics and maintenance have went through our buildings for the past several months, and that's what they've been doing, is making sure. And the important piece of this, and I don't think I said this, is we have a building automation system that we put in through the 2014 bond. So we're able to understand that our systems are working properly and as designed. So again, at a minimum, 4 air exchanges an hour and a maximum 12 air exchanges an hour. So that minimum number is the number that we have to hit as approved by ASHRAE. And at 12 is 100%. So the idea here is we adjust based on what the temperature is outside, or if there's smoky conditions, for example. We don't want to fill our buildings full of smoke. So at a minimum, we hit that 12. At a maximum, at a minimum, we hit 4. At a maximum, we hit 12. And we're watching all of this through that building automation system. So we know our buildings are functioning as designed to hit those air exchanges. So that's when I said, if something goes down, if we have a unit that fails or something, which will happen at some point, we will know that. We'll be able to alert staff to move those classrooms out of that space into another space where ventilation is working properly. I also want to note, and I should have said this earlier, is if your room is interior of the building and you don't have windows, or even if you're on an exterior wall and your windows aren't operable, that's okay. Because the way the ventilation systems work is, again, you're pulling that fresh air into the building and then you're exhausting it out of the building. And we're trying to minimize the idea of recirculating air. So even if you're interior of the building, you're still getting that ventilation in, and then we're exhausting that out.
Great, thanks, Rob. Okay. Actually, another follow-up just came in. What does 4 air exchanges per hour mean? What is 1 air exchange?
Yeah, it's just the way that each room in our buildings has a specified CFM coming into the building. So that's how we measure airflow into the room. And again, the way the units work is they're pulling in fresh air, and then they're exhausting it out. So that would be 1 air exchange. So we're doing that a minimum of 4 times, a maximum of 12 times in an hour for each individual room.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Could you point us teachers to find where to find procedures specifically for COVID prevention? For instance, what does cleaning desks look like, passing periods and lunch periods, etc.? Rob, do you want to just address what kind of cleaning products we're using and how those are, maybe Stephanie can address how the certain cleaning products help prevent COVID, sorry.
I'll just talk a little bit about the cleaning protocols, right? So let's think of a cafeteria. And we're wanting to make sure that we clean between cohorts. So when we say clean, we're cleaning and disinfecting. So soap and water, and then we put something called Oxford TB, and then that's the disinfectant of those. So that's why we're trying to allow 5 to 10 minutes in between groups of students to make sure we're disinfecting those tables. Same thing in a classroom at the elementary level. Primarily, those students will stay in the same classroom all day long, so they only have to be disinfected once a day. So what we're asking our teachers to do, and each teacher should have a bottle of Oxiver in their room, is to spray those desks, let it sit for 1 minute, wipe it off, and that's the disinfecting that has to occur in between those cohorts. So that is happening throughout the building. And again, the idea here is that we're cleaning and disinfecting those surfaces prior to someone coming in contact with it. So as long as they're staying in the cohort, we're doing it once a day. If cohorts change in a classroom, we have to do it in between the cohorts. The same thing is happening on our buses, where we're disinfecting our buses at the end of each day or in between groups of students. So transportation employees are doing that. Like I said, transportation employees and custodians are helping us in our buildings, as well as instructional staff in the classrooms.
Great, thank you.
Can I just add one thing to that, Carolyn? Rob, do you mind? I know it came up at the board meeting also, talking about that cleaning, the solutions that we're using, that they are safe for classrooms and for kiddos and adults as well.
Definitely. And what we're using is we have two products, one Envirox, which is a cleaner, and then Oxford TB, both approved to use with our youngest learners. And we use that throughout all of our buildings. They have the lowest level of toxicity of a cleaner that's out there. So these cleaners were vetted by a committee years ago. I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, approved by public health, and also on the CD's website for cleaners. So very effective cleaners, and that's why we're using them. But we have what makes me feel comfortable is we have enough product in the warehouse right now to get us through August. I should say get us through May of this coming school year. So feel good about that. And yes, I hope that answers your question, Stephanie.
Great, thanks so much. Rob's another question for you. Someone's asking, are the records of the air quality checks available to review?
I don't know about records, no, and I would say no. But we're able to track that from our building automation system. So we can grab points in time to see what, for example, carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide levels are, CO2 levels are in the building, and that's what we're watching. But we're also watching, we can make sure that our dampers are opening up, et cetera. That's what's pulling in our fresh air. So, but it's really a snapshot in time, Carolyn, and we don't have that's logged on a minute or hourly basis.
Great, thank you. So we've gone through all the questions that are coming in. So maybe for the last few minutes, if you want to go around and just answer any questions that maybe you've been getting individually that you feel like it would be useful to share with all staff. Mike, do you want to start? I'm sure you're getting lots of questions. You're on mute.
Yes, tons of questions. I think the biggest questions we did was already answered was the quarantine one. But we clarified that the quarantine one is based on exposure at the school sites of where the employee is working. Okay, I think one other one is around leave, when they can take leave, what happens with substitutes. And so we're working drastically hard on that. I'm trying to find substitutes. And so we're able to find more long-term than any short-term subs at this point. And so we're actually looking into a couple of vendors right now to see if we can contract with vendors to help us out with that. So are other districts, but I think it's something that probably needs to be addressed now because of what we're in this pandemic. So those are the two biggies that I can think of that we're getting.
Great, thanks, Mike. Robin or Sam, any common questions you've been getting in from teachers or principals that you think would be worth sharing?
Sure, I can say that, and maybe this is more just the sharing of a tip, is we had heard quite a bit from staff about Well, I don't know with everything that I'm going to need to do in the morning before I go to the building, how am I going to remember to do my own screening? And do you have an easier way to do it? And so actually over the course of the past few days, I've heard from several staff members who have said they are very happy that they have either access the QR code from their phone, or they have added the screening form to the home screen on their phone. And also a couple of staff members who reached out last week to say now what they do is they set an alarm on their phone every morning for the same time, which is the reminder for them to do the form before they go to the building. So just a couple of hacks. What those really are is to just making the morning part of the screening easier.
Thanks, Robin. Sam, do you have anything to add that you've been getting?
Well, I did hear a great suggestion from Laura Stone over at Crestview Elementary about hand washing protocol with young kids and how to get through a whole class of kids without it taking an hour. And so their method is to have the kids line up, put their hands out, they come by and they squirt just a tiny drop of soap in every kid's hand. And then they come by with a squirt bottle of water and spray their hands with water so they can lather and make sure they're spending enough time lathering up. And then they'll just go through by the sink and rinse and dry. That accelerates everything. I thought that was a great. So thank you, Laura Stone at Crestview Elementary, for that one.
Thanks, Sam. Stephanie, anything that I haven't asked you that you've been getting a lot of questions about?
That's actually a great idea, Sam. Do that with my kids at home too. I think the question that comes up a lot for us is around quarantine times and isolation times, and why sometimes somebody who actually is sick or has tested positive gets to come back before the people that were contacts of them get to come back. So want to, let folks know that if you're sick and you test positive, you're out for 10 days from when your symptoms start. If you've been in contact with somebody who is later confirmed to be positive, you're out for 14 days. And it doesn't matter if you have a test, unfortunately, in that 14 days that tells you you're negative. Your quarantine is always 14 days. And that's because it can take up to 14 days for the COVID-19 to actually develop. So that's a question that we get a lot. It doesn't seem fair that people get to come back before their contacts do, but that's the reason why. So
got it. Thanks, Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
Rob, anything else that your department's been getting asked a lot that I haven't already asked you?
Yeah, I've got a lot of department employees asking about number of cases, number of people being quarantined, et cetera. So the district is working quickly on getting a dashboard set up. So we will have a timeline on that, or hopefully early next week. But the idea would be is we'd have a number of positive cases, number of people quarantined, possibly number of schools affected within that dashboard, just to give it an idea, just an overview of where we're at in the district.
Great. Thanks, Rob, for adding that. So unless anyone else has anything to share, I think we can wrap up for today. Thank you all for being here. And thank you, everyone, for your questions. And if there's something else that you want to ask that you haven't, you can submit it on that form. And we'll try to email you an answer and post it up on our intranet page. But thanks, everyone. Have a great Monday and a great week. Bye.